Family, lean in for a moment. There are sacred moments when heaven bends close, when the distance between you and God collapses into a whisper. Today we're going to talk about those holy seconds when your prayer, your cry, your dua rises and nothing can stand in its way. I believe there is a closeness you're invited into, a moment that shifts everything. And I want you to step into it with faith and expectancy. There are moments in our journey with God where everything else grows faint and the reality of his nearness becomes undeniable. Divine proximity is not simply about a geographical closeness. It is a posture of the heart, a spiritual atmosphere that envelops you when your attention shifts from everything clamoring for it and turns completely toward him. In that space, prayer ceases to feel like words you're throwing into the air and starts to feel like a conversation in a quiet room where God is seated across from you, leaning in, listening, breathing with you. The closeness of God is not a mystical idea reserved for saints or prophets. It is an open invitation to every soul that longs for more than ritual. It is the whisper that has been echoing through time, draw near to me, and I will draw near to you. When we talk about unstoppable answers, we are not describing a vending machine version of God who simply dispenses requests. We are speaking of an alignment where heaven and earth meet in a person's obedience, trust, and surrender. Imagine the moment when your longing meets his perfect will, when your desires have been refined through trials, tears, and waiting until they match his heart. That is where divine proximity begins to transform your prayer life. The atmosphere shifts. You start praying differently. Your words are no longer demands. They become echoes of his will. You sense that what you are asking is already resonating in his heart, and the resistance you once felt in prayer seems to dissolve. Divine proximity is like stepping into the inner courts, away from the noise, away from the pretense. It's where pretended faith cannot survive, where performance is stripped away, where you bring your raw humanity, your broken edges, your unpolished honesty. And in that sacred vulnerability, you discover that God does not recoil, he draws closer. It is almost paradoxical. The more you reveal your weakness, the more his strength manifests, the more you let go of your fight, the more he clothes you with grace. That nearness is not casual, it is weighty, holy, tender. It shifts the way you carry yourself because you sense that your petitions are no longer floating into silence, but are being caught, held, and cherished. Unstoppable answers emerge in that place because proximity alters perspective. You begin to see what matters most to God. Your ambitions recalibrate. You may have approached him with a list of demands, but proximity strips that list down to what truly aligns with his purpose. There is an intimacy that births clarity. You realize some things you thought you wanted were never meant to define you. Other desires that lay dormant begin to surface because God plants them there. The unstoppable nature of the answer is not about speed, but about certainty. When heaven ordains it, no delay, opposition, or circumstance can override it. Divine proximity positions you where your heart beats in rhythm with his, and that rhythm commands breakthrough. There is something profound about recognizing that prayer was never meant to be a one-sided effort. God's presence is not passive. It is alive, dynamic, leaning toward you. In proximity, you notice the subtle nudges, the quiet assurances, the unspoken confirmations that what you are seeking is already being orchestrated. It is not about striving harder, it is about abiding deeper. The unstoppable answer is born not out of frantic pleading, but out of restful confidence. You may still feel tension, you may still wrestle, but beneath it all there is a steady conviction that God's timing is not arbitrary, that his will is not cruel, that his love is not conditional. That conviction shifts the very way you wait. Think of the way a child resting against a parent's chest begins to hear the heartbeat, begins to relax because security has replaced fear. Divine proximity is much like that. When your soul leans into the heartbeat of God, your prayers stop being anxious petitions and start becoming declarations birthed from intimacy. You speak what you have heard in his presence. You release what you have discerned from his heart. The authority of your words grows because they are saturated in his truth. This is why certain prayers feel unstoppable. They are no longer just yours. They are shared with heaven, carried by a kingdom mandate bigger than your individual story. As you move into that nearness, you notice how distractions lose their grip. The urgency of other people's opinions fades. The pressure to perform diminishes, and your confidence becomes anchored in something unshakable. Divine proximity has a way of exposing what cannot go with you into deeper places. Fear, comparison, doubt, they unravel in the light of his closeness. And as they unravel, space is made for faith to rise, for hope to breathe, for expectation to swell. You no longer pray as one uncertain of the outcome. You pray as one who has glimpsed the heart of the Father and carries assurance that his word will not return void. This transformation of prayer posture also invites a deeper sense of responsibility. When answers are unstoppable because they are aligned, you become a steward of what God entrusts. Proximity matures your desires. It teaches you that receiving from God is never just for you. It carries weight, purpose, assignment. What you ask for, when granted, is meant to ripple beyond your life into the lives of others. Divine proximity is never self-indulgent. It always draws you into partnership with heaven's agenda on earth. It moves you from consumer to collaborator, from bystander to participant in the unfolding of God's will. Vulnerability is the language heaven understands, the quiet surrender that moves beyond carefully scripted prayers and into the raw honesty of your soul. When you stand before God without pretense, when you allow the fragile parts of yourself to be seen, you create space for His Spirit to breathe into every unspoken ache. There is something profoundly powerful about letting down the walls you have built to protect yourself, admitting that you cannot fix everything, cannot control every outcome, cannot hide the tremor in your voice when you whisper the truth of where you really are. In that moment, the posture of performance breaks and authenticity rises like incense. God is not intimidated by your questions, your tears, or your trembling faith. He is drawn to it because it is real, and real is where relationship is birthed. Vulnerability invites heaven's response because it reveals trust. To be vulnerable before an unseen God is to declare that you believe He will not harm you in your exposure. It is an act of defiance against shame and an act of worship against fear. Every layer you peel back says, I choose to meet you here even if I don't have the answers. Heaven leans in when you stop hiding behind spiritual cliches and instead speak from the tender places you usually keep locked away. There is an intimacy born in confession, a closeness birthed in tears that no amount of eloquent language can replicate. Vulnerability shifts your prayer life from duty to encounter, from routine to revelation. The words become alive because they are drenched in your humanity and His divinity. Consider the way a friend leans closer when you whisper something personal, how the bond deepens because authenticity has entered the room. Divine relationship operates in a similar rhythm. When you admit your weakness, heaven supplies strength. When you acknowledge your fear, peace begins to wrap around you like a garment. Vulnerability does not repel God, it magnetizes His presence. The very things you assumed would disqualify you, your doubts, your flaws, your inconsistencies become the doorway through which grace flows. It is there in the trembling voice and the tear-stained prayer that you sense His nearness most tangibly. It is there that you discover the God who stoops low, who gathers your broken pieces, who refuses to define you by the moments you wish you could erase. Vulnerability is an act of faith because it surrenders control. To open your heart without guarantee of outcome is to declare that relationship matters more than results. Heaven responds to such trust because it mirrors the very heart of God, who invites rather than coerces, who waits for intimacy rather than demanding performance. The brittle image of self-sufficiency to crumble as you confess, I cannot do this alone. That confession is not weakness. It is the soil in which miracles are planted. The story of Scripture is woven with moments where ordinary men and women laid down their defenses and poured out the truth of their hearts, only to encounter divine intervention. From Hannah's anguished cry for a child to David's psalms of lament, the record of heaven's response is clear. God draws near to the brokenhearted. He listens to the contrite. He moves toward the ones who refuse to pretend. When you risk vulnerability, you invite transformation. Layers of bitterness, pride, and self-reliance begin to loosen their grip. The posture of your soul shifts from striving to receiving, from proving to abiding. You stop performing for approval and start dwelling in acceptance. Vulnerability creates the silence where you can hear the still, small voice of God more clearly. It disrupts the noise of fear-driven striving and ushers you into a rest that striving could never produce. Heaven responds to vulnerability because it signals that you are ready for intimacy, ready for partnership, ready for the kind of breakthrough that only comes when everything is laid bare. Imagine entering your prayer space carrying the full weight of your worry, your shame, your longing. You do not sanitize your language or edit your tears. You come as you are, trembling and unsure. The very act of showing up like this becomes worship, an offering of truth placed on the altar. The veil of pride is torn, the walls of perfectionism crumble, and you sense something shift in the atmosphere. Vulnerability releases a fragrance of authenticity that heaven cannot resist. It is the posture that says, search me, know me, see me. And in response, the Spirit whispers assurance, conviction, comfort. The unseen begins to rearrange because heaven answers honesty. There is a holy paradox in vulnerability. The weaker you admit to being, the stronger heaven's power manifests. Paul's declaration that strength is perfected in weakness is not poetic rhetoric. It is a spiritual reality. When you relinquish the illusion of control, you position yourself to receive what only God can supply. Vulnerability becomes the conduit for grace, the channel through which power flows unimpeded by pride. The tears you thought would drown you become the water in which hope floats. The admission you feared would mark you as unworthy becomes the evidence that you are utterly dependent on the one who already called you worthy. Heaven responds to vulnerability because it mirrors the heart of Christ, who himself chose to be vulnerable. In the garden, he prayed with sweat like drops of blood, laying bare his anguish before the Father. On the cross, stripped and exposed, he entrusted his spirit to the one who sent him. The incarnation itself is divine vulnerability, God clothed in flesh, entering our fragility to redeem it. When you open your heart, you are walking in the footsteps of the one who first opened his for you. That alignment releases a resonance in the heavens. It declares that you are not hiding, you are abiding. Vulnerability transforms your perspective on unanswered prayers. Instead of demanding immediate solutions, you begin to value the presence over the product. You learn that sometimes the most profound answer heaven gives is himself. Peace that steadies, love that heals, wisdom that guides. Vulnerability matures you, teaching you that intimacy is the goal, not merely outcomes. Heaven's response to an open heart often comes in unexpected ways of scripture that suddenly illuminates your situation, a friend's timely encouragement, an inner assurance that cannot be explained. These are answers birthed in relationship, not transaction. The ripple effect of vulnerability reaches beyond your prayer closet. It reshapes the way you engage with others. As heaven meets you in your honesty, you become safer for people around you. Compassion grows, empathy deepens, judgment softens. The walls you dismantle before God begin to crumble in your relationships. Allowing love to flow more freely, your testimony shifts from polished perfection to authentic grace, and others find courage to be real because they have seen the freedom you now walk in. Heaven's response to vulnerability multiplies outward, touching marriages, friendships, communities with the fragrance of authenticity. To remain vulnerable requires courage, for the temptation to retreat behind masks never fully disappears, yet each time you choose transparency over performance, you build a history of trust with God. You begin to recognize patterns of his faithfulness woven through your story. Vulnerability stops being a momentary risk and becomes a lifestyle of dependence. It anchors you in the reality that you are fully known and fully loved, that nothing hidden remains unredeemed when surrendered to his light. Heaven continues to respond, not because you manipulate it with brokenness, but because your honesty aligns you with truth, and truth is the soil where freedom grows. Every silent sob, every unpolished confession, every whispered admission of weakness is heard. Heaven's ear bends toward the trembling voice because love delights in authenticity. Vulnerability creates a sacred intersection where your humanity and God's divinity meet, where fear gives way to faith, where shame dissolves under the weight of unconditional love. In that meeting place, prayers are not recited formulas, but living expressions of trust, raw and beautiful. Heaven does not require you to be eloquent. It desires you to be real. When you finally release the pressure to impress, when you finally show up empty-handed, heaven fills the emptiness with grace beyond measure, alignment of heart, and timing unlocks favor, because there is a rhythm to heaven that cannot be rushed or manipulated. A cadence that flows beyond our calendars and clocks. When your heart is tuned to that rhythm, when your desires are shaped not by urgency but by surrender, you begin to sense a shift in the way life unfolds. The craving to force outcomes fades, replaced by a quiet awareness that every season carries its own assignment. Timing in the kingdom is not delay for delay's sake. It is preparation wrapped in wisdom. To align your heart with divine timing is to acknowledge that some doors are closed not as rejection, but as protection, that some dreams are withheld until maturity can steward them without destruction. This posture rewires the way you perceive waiting, no longer as punishment, but as an incubation of promise. Alignment is not merely external obedience, it is the internal posture of trust. It is letting the Spirit examine motives, sift ambitions, refine desires until what you long for is inseparable from what God longs to release. A misaligned heart can sabotage blessing, turning what should have been favor into frustration. Alignment slows you down enough to ask deeper questions. Why do I want this? Who benefits from it? Does it reflect the character of Christ or the craving of my ego? When the answers are sifted in the presence of God, impurities rise to the surface, and you are invited to lay them down. This process is rarely glamorous, yet it is sacred. For every layer surrendered creates space for the pure weight of favor to rest without distortion. Timing acts as the silent teacher. There is a divine calendar invisible to human sight, and when you learn to lean into it, striving eases. Imagine the relief of knowing you do not have to pry open every door, of resting in the assurance that what is meant for you cannot bypass you. Alignment teaches patience not as passive waiting, but as active trust, a daily decision to prepare, to grow, to deepen roots while the fruit matures unseen. Some of the most significant breakthroughs are born in seasons that felt stagnant when heaven was orchestrating details you could not perceive. Alignment invites you to participate in this unseen orchestration, to live attentive to whispers, nudges, confirmations that may appear subtle but are profoundly significant. Favor is not random, it rests on readiness. When heart and timing converge, favor flows like a river meeting its course. Consider the life of Joseph. Had he stepped into leadership before prison shaped his character, the weight of influence might have crushed him. Instead, years of obscurity honed wisdom, forged humility, tempered ambition until the appointed time arrived. Favor released prematurely can harm more than heal. Favor released in alignment multiplies beyond measure. To embrace this truth is to surrender the idol of immediacy, to release the demand that God adhere to your timetable. Alignment humbles the ego and exalts faith, whispering that preparation is proof of promise, that waiting is not wasted when heaven is weaving. Alignment of heart is nurtured in intimacy. It is cultivated in the quiet where you allow the Spirit to illuminate unseen motives, to confront impatience, to heal wounds that would corrupt blessing. Heart alignment means you are not merely seeking God's hand, but cherishing His heart. It shifts your prayer from when will you to what are you forming in me. Timing without alignment can feel cruel because you misinterpret delay as disfavor. Alignment reframes it as love, an invitation to grow deeper so the eventual release is not squandered. There is peace in knowing that favor withheld today may be the very thing preserving your destiny tomorrow. This peace is the fruit of alignment, a settledness that transcends anxiety, a trust that steadies even when circumstances contradict expectation. The mystery of divine timing often dismantles our linear thinking. God dwells outside of time, yet steps into it with perfect precision. Alignment invites you into that mystery, teaching you to discern seasons rather than demand schedules. Some doors will open suddenly. Others will creak slowly over years. Both are favor when they flow from alignment. The Spirit trains your ear to recognize subtle indicators of renewed desire, a prophetic confirmation, an unexplainable peace, a closing of old avenues. These signs are less about formula and more about relationship, for alignment is sustained not by rules but by ongoing communion. As you walk closely, you develop an instinct, a knowing that is not born of logic alone, but a familiarity with His voice. Alignment transforms ambition. Dreams, once fueled by the hunger for validation, are reoriented toward purpose. Success loses its seductive allure when separated from significance. Alignment calls you deeper, past applause, into assignment. Timing refines this by allowing character to catch up with calling. Without timing, vision becomes burden. With timing, vision becomes fulfillment. Favor rests easily when your soul is prepared to carry it. The joy of aligned timing is not only that doors open, but that you are ready to walk through them without fear, comparison, or compromise. It is a quiet confidence born of having waited with God rather than striving against Him. There is an unspoken freedom in surrendering to this process. Anxiety diminishes because you stop interpreting closed doors as evidence of abandonment. Resentment fades as you realize that divine delay is often divine development. Alignment rewrites your story from victim of circumstance to participant in destiny. You begin to see patterns, threads of grace woven through seasons you once despised. In retrospect, timing makes sense, but alignment allowed you to endure when sense was absent. This endurance shapes resilience, equips empathy, and deepens gratitude for the favor that eventually manifests. Favor unlocked through alignment is not merely personal, it is generational. When you align, the blessings that flow touch spheres beyond your immediate reach. Your obedience becomes a seed for others' breakthrough. Your waiting becomes a testimony that strengthens weary hearts. Timing ensures that what is released carries longevity, sustainability, and impact. Quick success may dazzle for a moment, but favor forged in alignment endures storms, outlasts trends, resists decay. Alignment anchors favor and purpose, ensuring it serves kingdom rather than ego, legacy rather than fleeting applause. Alignment of heart and timing invites stillness. Stillness is not inactivity, it is intentional anchoring and trust. It is allowing the Spirit to tune your desires, to steady your emotions, to quiet the inner noise that drives frantic striving. In stillness, you discern that delay is sometimes divine choreography, positioning you precisely where destiny intersects opportunity. Favor does not bypass process, it flows through it. Alignment transforms process from drudgery to holy ground, where each day of preparation carries eternal weight. As you lean into timing, hope ceases to be fragile because it no longer hinges on deadlines but on faithfulness. Every story of lasting impact bears this thread. Moments of waiting, seasons of obscurity, hours of unseen cultivation. Alignment redeems those seasons, teaching you that heaven is not indifferent, that silence is not absence, that preparation is proof of love. Timing without alignment is like wind without sails. Alignment without timing is like sails without wind. Together they create movement, a propulsion toward destiny that feels effortless because it is carried by grace rather than strain. Favor manifests naturally, almost quietly, because the groundwork was laid in secret, in the slow sacred work of trust. The interplay of alignment and timing cultivates discernment. You learn to differentiate between good opportunities and ordained ones, between the tempting shortcut and the path of purpose. Not every open door is an assignment, and not every delay is denial. Alignment sharpens your sensitivity, allowing you to pause when flesh would rush, to move when fear would freeze. Timing whispers when the moment has arrived. Alignment assures you your heart is ready. Together they orchestrate a symphony of grace, a narrative marked not by frantic striving but by steady unfolding. Favor becomes less an event and more a lifestyle, a continuous flow from the well of intimacy. When alignment deepens, gratitude flourishes. You stop despising the slow seasons and start honoring them as preparation. Each closed door becomes evidence of protection, each detour an opportunity for growth. Timing transforms bitterness into anticipation because you know that nothing surrendered is wasted. Favor unlocked in its time tastes sweeter, carries greater weight, bears lasting fruit. Alignment prepares you to steward it wisely, to hold blessing lightly, to keep worship central even when increase comes. The rhythm of heaven becomes the cadence of your heart, guiding steps, framing decisions, infusing peace even when uncertainty lingers. To live in alignment with divine timing is to embrace mystery without fear, to welcome process without resentment, to anticipate favor without entitlement. It is the quiet strength that refuses shortcuts, the steady faith that trusts unseen hands weaving unseen plans. Alignment shapes identity. Timing unveils destiny. Favor flows as their convergence. This journey is not linear, not formulaic. It is relational, intimate, fluid. Each season whispers its own lesson. Each delay conceals its own gift. Each release carries its own weight of glory. Alignment of heart and timing unlocks favor because it harmonizes earth with heaven, desire with design, longing with purpose, until what was once striving becomes effortless unfolding, until what was once waiting becomes holy preparation, until what was once delay becomes the very proof of love.